Go live now. Good evening and welcome to UK Crime Book Club. This evening I'm delighted to be joined by Neil Daws, who's going to be talking about his Kember and Hayes mysteries. And also a bit later he'll be talking about something else that he's got coming up in the future. Hi Neil, thank you for joining us.
Hello there, thank you, it's my pleasure.
I wanted to just start by asking if you'd like to introduce yourself to anybody who hasn't read your books before, and also tell us a little bit about the series.
Okay, well, Neil Daws, as you can see on screen. I am an ex-civil servant, and I was in the civil service for about, recovering from COVID, for about 30 years. 20 of that was spent in security and counter-terrorism. Tried to write a spy book. That didn't get very far, mainly because some people I showed it to, one in particular, said that I was giving too much away, so I thought I'd shelve that and turn to crime, as it were. Then I retired from the civil service, thought I'd give writing a real good go, and various years and stages later, I managed to get one published, which was A Quiet Place to Kill, which is there, I think.
Behind you, yeah.
That was the Kember and Hayes series. It was supposed to be a kind of a buddy thing, like Holmes and Watson, or one of those where you get two guys and they're kind of fighting against the world, or even a chap and a female sidekick, like the Inspector Lindley mysteries. But I had a detective in mind, but then I managed to find, I was given rather, an article from a newspaper which was about female top guns in Afghanistan. I thought there's a story there, so I put that to one side. And then my mother-in-law found another article about female pilots in World War II. I thought, that's an even better story. So I read the woman that was in it is Joy Lofthouse, who's actually this woman here in the picture.
I wondered, I saw her up there on the thing.
Yeah, she's up there as a bit of an inspiration. She's an air transport auxiliary pilot. So the air transport auxiliary flew planes around the country in World War II, taking them from A to B. So from factories to the front line, from the front line to repair stations, etc. Mainly men to start with, but then the women kicked up a stink, and one in particular, Pauline Gower, managed to persuade them to let women fly as well. And that's mainly because the ATA was supposedly ancient and tattered airmen, because they had one eye, one guy had one leg, one guy had one arm, and he took off by holding the stick in his knees and doing the throttle with his good arm. And some were blind in one eye, so they were either old or infirm or injured in some way, and yet they still got to fly these planes around. So there was no reason whatsoever why perfectly competent women who had been flying in flying circuses and flying daddy's planes all over Europe, because it was a rich man's pursuit back then, they were perfectly competent. And that proved to be so, because several hundred of them ended up flying throughout the war, and Joy Lofthouse was one. And I managed to see her. She was about 92 or 93 when I saw her. She died a year or so later. I saw her at Shoreham Air Museum. It's a tiny little museum in a village in Kent. Has got loads of Battle of Britain memorabilia in there, and that's where I got that picture. And she signed that. And after she'd done all the signings, I hung back and I had a chat with her for half an hour. And so she started telling me stories about her time in the ATA, and the sparkle in her eyes was that of a 25-year-old girl, not a 92-year-old woman. When she was talking about this time, it was clearly something she'd really enjoyed. Although it was a dangerous time, because you could be shot by your own anti-aircraft, you could be shot by the Germans, you could come down in bad weather. flying damaged planes to repair stations. It could just fall out of the sky because it was no longer airworthy. So they weren't less brave than the men. They more so, in fact, because they weren't allowed to fly on instruments. They had to do it by line of sight and everything. So I thought that's a great inspiration for a character. And although I had my detective already in my mind, she slid in as to be the foil to his detective. And that the Kember and Hayes series was then born, hunting serial killers in and around the airfields of Kent.
Yeah,
that was a longer answer than you expected, probably.
No, that was fine. Because the book that we're talking about this evening and the one I've just finished is Perfect Time to Murder, which is book 3 in the series. I enjoyed meeting them both again, particularly Lizzie, because I really like her. I mean, she's the sort of a woman who, she doesn't take any nonsense, does she? And she, she does fly, but in this book, she's been grounded for something that's not really her fault, but because she's a woman, it sort of gets picked up immediately that it's her fault. And it's actually linked to another sort of famous pilot, isn't it? So did you want to sort of tell us a little bit more about the book?
Yeah, well, the link is Amy Johnson. She took off from somewhere in the north, flying to I can't remember what it was now, Kidlington. Anyway, she it was very cloudy, very overcast. There's storms coming in, and the general rule was you don't go up if you can't see, because they weren't allowed to fly on instruments. Although many of them did learn how. They asked a lot of the pilots to take them into what was called a link trainer, which is basically a little box that looks like the inside of a cockpit, and then you fly blind on instruments using this thing. So a lot of them knew how to do it. But Amy Johnson took off, and excuse me. Amy Johnson took off, and that was really the last time she was seen alive. She ended up in the middle of the Thames, near Home Bay, I think it is, and there is Whitstable, I think. Anyway, there's a memorial on the seafront of her, and she lost the way. She, it was going round and round in circles. It was really bad weather. It was dangerous to come down through the clouds because you never knew what you were going to have underneath you, especially if you'd lost your way and you didn't know where you were. You could be crashing into the side of a mountain, into pylons, radio masts, anything. So she had to bail out, and the plane was seen to be crashing into the sea. And somebody saw the parachute, and a ship went to her aid, but she and the person who jumped in to save her both drowned. And I thought, well, although that's a tragic tale, it's a good way of leading into this story, because I wanted to get Lizzie Hayes and Jonathan Kember away from the airfield where they'd been investigating the first 2 books. And the only way I could see to do that, to get them both out of that environment and into another environment, was have her grounded.
Clever.
So she went up in. So in the book, she goes up in the same way, and crashes in similar circumstances at a place quite near here. And I chose that particular spot because it's a place where the Kent Air Ambulance crashed quite a number of years ago, and there's a memorial on the hillside, and they crashed in kind of similar circumstances. So I thought that would be a good way of getting her grounded without her actually killing anyone or herself.
Yeah.
And then, so when it all kicks off elsewhere in Kent, she's able eventually to go and meet up with Kember and rekindle this Holmes and Watson type relationship.
Yeah, no, I really like their relationship, and actually reading all of the 3 books. I mean, if you haven't read the 3 books, it's important to say you can read them as standalones, can't you? So you sort of give a little bit of a sort of overview as you go through the books. But yeah, I found that really interesting. And Kember's been asked to investigate a murder in a colliery, hasn't he? That where it's been sort of deemed as the person died of natural causes, but the investigating officer doesn't believe that that's the case, so he asks for Kember to come along, because I think he says something like, well, if you prove that something else has happened, then it's not my fault, it's your fault. So, which I thought was quite funny. It's like,
Yeah.
pass the buck.
Oh yeah, always pass the buck. If give somebody a poison chalice, and then if they poison themselves, that's it.
Exactly.
Serves them right. But if it turns out that they survive the poison, then the person who's assigned them to that gets reflected glory.
Yeah.
So so it was a win-win for the detective who put them onto, or put Kember onto this. But it was the colliery is somewhere that I looked at before, because there's a mining trail down in East Kent. There was an East Kent coalfield, and I thought that would be really interesting to set some kind. It's like an Agatha Christie on an island kind of thing. They're in this colliery. It's a closed community. It's virtually all men, apart from a few women who work up top doing kind of various lightweight tasks, but menial tasks, repetitive. The boss is a man. His secretary is a woman, but all the main positions are men. It's a very, back then, as it probably would be now, it was a very testosterone filled environment.
Yeah.
So for the detective to go in is not too bad. He's butting like slags together. But when Lizzie turns up, the game changes, because they both like her and fancy her at the same time, but they don't want a woman on their patch, kind of thing. No. It's all right if they're doing the menial stuff or their boss's secretary, but assisting the detective, that's something that puts their noses out of joint. And you were talking to me earlier about misogyny. There was quite a bit of that on air stations. You had to kind of chip in. I mean, the women who were in the WAFs were expected to, really pull their weight in various things and not let the side down, so to speak. And the ATA were supposed to do everything the men could. If a man crashed a plane, oh, bad luck, sir. If a woman crashed a plane, it was, well, she would, wouldn't she?
Yeah, exactly. The officer who does that, he says, it's, he almost has expected it to happen, doesn't he? When he sort of reprimands her.
She's got one kind of ally on the panel that she sees to ground her. There's one kind of ally, and the other two are real old RAF sticklers. Who don't, and it's like Group Captain Dallington in the first two books, or in the third book as well.
Yeah,
he really doesn't want any women on his air station. It's a man's world, and make the tea by all means. Go in the radar station if you have to, but don't come anywhere near my airplanes. Thank you very much. Sorry,
that's okay.
I needed more strepsils before I came on. Yes, so misogyny on the air stations, and in the colliery. So when Lizzie goes from one environment to the other, she can't really escape it. And also with, to a degree, I mean, Jonathan Kember butts heads quite a lot with his superintendent in Tunbridge, in his police station where he's sent from in the first book, and that's where it basically works out of. In the second book, he meets the superintendent in the village, and they butt heads again, but in front of everybody else. And what he's getting with him is what Lizzie gets with everybody, because the men don't want her there. The police superintendent doesn't want her anywhere in this investigation, even though she's bringing a certain set of skills, which is the kind of profiling bit. And her colleagues, at least one of her colleagues, in the first couple of books, really doesn't take to her at all. And it's not because she's a woman; it's just because I've spoken to this before on other interviews, that some women can be quite judgmental about another woman, a man, I know men can as well, but
Yeah.
if a man sees another man, it's kind of, they just kind of look at each other and that's it. If you look in, if you're on a station, I mean, I used to commute quite a lot into London, and you'd be standing on the station and you see a bloke walk by and nothing. You see a woman walk by, and you could appreciate the attractiveness, and that's it. But if you looked at what the woman did, if a man walked by, ignore it completely. If a woman walked by, you could see her looking at the hair, what she was wearing, the way she was walking, and you could see the judgment going on. And I've spoken to my wife and daughters about this, and they say, yeah, it's a real thing that women tend to be hard on other women and also very hard on themselves. And without going into too much of that in the book, I wanted an element of that so that she's not only battling everything around her, she's battling herself and her colleagues as well. I hope I managed to do that realistically and sensitively. I didn't want it to be a really, really big issue in the book because obviously being a man, I've never experienced what she will have done. But based on what I could learn from female friends and family, I wanted an element of that in there as well, because that just added another level of stress to her afflictions, which she's got mild OCD, but that's because of something that happened in her childhood, as well as anxiety and panic attacks. And I've often, stop me if I'm rambling on, but if
No,
anxiety, and some people have commented online on various forums that, well, she wouldn't be allowed to fly then, would she? Well, only if it's detected. She knows she's got it, but she's very good at hiding it.
It's like
it's like high functioning people with autism. They learn to be like other people while inside they're not. And that's what she does. She kind of, when she needs to, she can look as normal and competent as everybody else. And she is. And when she's in an airplane, she's fine. She can do anything she likes. You know, she's free. She can fly this thing. To be quite honest, if they loaded the guns with bullets, she could have been a fighter pilot. You know, most of the women could. They were very, very good. But on the ground, there are certain situations that trigger breathing difficulties and anxiety and borderline panic attacks, washing of hands to just wash away whatever problem it is. And so all these things, the misogyny, her own ailments, stuff from other women, stuff from herself, I think makes her quite a complex character, whereas Kember is quite a simple guy. He's a cop. He's doing A, B, C, and that'll get him to the end. She does A, B, C, D, E, F, and she goes. But while he's doing that and she's doing that, they're getting to the same point and corroborating each other, and sometimes coming together in the middle to spark off each other, sometimes challenge each other, and hopefully that creates a good piece of tension to get to the end.
I think they're a great couple. I really like them. Kaz has just commented as well on Facebook to say that she said she's a big fan of your series and you really do your research, which I was going to come on to in a minute. So we'll keep Kaz's question for that one. But also Deb said evening as well. And Kaz says that you've got a nice UK Crime Book Club mug up behind you, which I can see actually behind your head.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And Crime Fest, and I will write 500 words and 500 more. That's from The Mousetrap.
Oh, yeah.
And that's actually from the Globe Theatre. It's I think it's a Macbeth mug, but I like the blood going down it.
Yeah, I like the blood going down it. Actually, it's a good crime one. So your books are historical, and so obviously there's an element of research, and you've sort of touched on it briefly. But is the research a really interesting part of your writing for you?
It is. It's an interesting part and a necessary part, I think. but it's also, I'm one of these authors that go down rabbit holes. So, oh, lighters, Zippo lighters and things in the 1940s. Oh, and then you go off into something else and something else, and then you're away from where you were supposed to be going. A bit like Lizzie Hayes, in fact. But research is important. My dad took me as a boy to places like HMS Belfast and the Imperial War Museum. Took me to many air shows. Showed me, and even when we went to a holiday on the Isle of Wight, we were holidaying. We had these cottages right next to the old gun emplacement, and I got a picture of me standing inside of where the shells would go round, and I'm shorter than the shell niche. So the shells were bigger than me that were being fired at the time. Well, I was only little, but so I knew a lot about the Second World War from that and from programs, also films, although Americanized films. So that's the reason why I gave it that backdrop, is because I knew a bit about it, and also because the war in the Second World War, you didn't have mobile phones. The communications were actually a lot more complicated because you had to go through exchanges. They weren't automatic exchanges, so people could be listening in, and then you could only get 3 minutes, especially during the war. A lot of the telecommunications network was freed up or reserved for military use. So if you did have to make a call, it had to be really necessary, or very, very short distance, or very necessary. And there was always somebody saying, right, 3 minutes, no, you can't have any more, off you go, bye, click. So that was a thing. Forensics was in its infancy, really. I know you got Sherlock Holmes, who was supposedly a forensic profiler and a forensic a person of forensics, doing studying scarlet, looking at blood types and things. But in general, I mean, fingerprints weren't really were a thing, but you didn't have blood types. You had blood types, but you didn't have things like rhesus. They discovered rhesus during the war, and certain other things like various preparations of morphine and stuff, and painkillers and antibiotics were coming in around that time. So forensics were in its infancy. So you couldn't just send something off. Even with fingerprints, one of the books I say that they send it off to Scotland Yard and it goes off on the fast train. You couldn't just email it through. It had to be physically taken down to the station and on a train, and somebody had to collect it and walk it around to Scotland Yard, and then they had to put it in the queue, and so it could be days, weeks, whatever, before this came back. So that was an interesting part of the research, and an interesting part of the reason why I set it in the Second World War. But the war was only a backdrop to the story, and I had to research the Air Transport Auxiliary because I would have done anyway. Having met Joy Lofthouse, I would have delved into it a bit more anyway because it was interesting, even though I hadn't written about it. But I got several books written by the various ATA members, Lettice Curtis and Jackie Moggeridge. Jackie Moggeridge actually was she was in a Mosquito, a real fast Second World War fighter bomber, when the news came in that the war ended, and she knew that the plane that she was in is the last time that she was going to be allowed to fly an RAF plane. So what she did is she took it up to the maximum ceiling that it could and dived down and screamed across the airfield to have one last thrill at flying these planes, because they knew they would never do it again. I didn't manage to get that into the book, although if the series had continued, I would have done somewhere. I definitely would have got it in somewhere. And also there was things like V1s that came in. They had to evade those, but she actually chased one. Jackie Moggeridge chased one just to see where it was going and what it was doing. That's before they started tipping them over with their wings and killing them. So all that kind of thing is interesting to me. Fire brigades and uniforms for the police. Did they have burners or colour gas in the station? They didn't have a police station in the village. It's just it's basically a house which has been converted downstairs to be the police station, and then he lives upstairs. but it's not a police station as you would recognise today. It was
No, it's like a police house sort of thing. Like,
yeah, and most village bobbies just did it from their house, and there was a plaque
Mm.
above the door saying PC or whatever it is, whatever their name was, and of what constabulary. I had to research who would be on an air station, and I had to have a reason for them not to be more personnel and not and less women. Dallington was a factor in that, obviously,
Yeah.
but there were always WAFs around. But because these squadrons had been taken away, they'd been sent elsewhere to Biggin Hill and other airfields to scatter them during the Battle of Britain, because the first book is just at the start of the Battle of Britain.
Yeah.
I needed a way of getting certain personnel in certain places. I needed to know their hierarchy and their ranks, so that I knew that the person speaking reverentially would be doing so to the right person. And village life. I mean, my mother-in-law was born in a little village in Berkshire, and she told me about everybody knew everyone's business pretty much, whether they wanted you to or not. And so that's how Ethel Garner came about. She's the village gossip. She runs Ethel Garner's gossip circle, as I call it, where she interacts with other women, elderly women in the village, and they're their own village security in a way, and protectors of the village by gathering all this knowledge. Which helps a little bit. No, which helps a bit in book 2, or was it book 3? I can't remember now. So what else is there? Oh, the panel that sits in judgment of Lizzie. I had to make sure that I got the name of that right. I mean, because there's always somebody. I mean, Mark Billingham. I've said this before elsewhere. That Mark Billingham always tells a story of somebody who wrote in saying, "Dear Mr. Billingham, do you know that there's not Starbucks on the southwest corner and it's a roundabout," all that kind of thing. And I used to laugh at that story, and now I know it's true, because somebody wrote in saying it was a very good story, review on Amazon, a very good story, but the author should note that wine was never sold in pubs. And I knew damn well that wine was sold in pubs, because all these pubs were tied houses. There was very, very few independents. They were all owned by big breweries, and these big breweries had links to winemakers and breweries abroad, and so they then bought up, say, loads of bottles of red wine or white wine. I thought, oh, what the hell do we do with them now? And so they farmed them out to the pubs, saying, push these. And it was normally the women that drank that, because they weren't too keen on drinking the beer. They were normally on the spirits, the gin and lemon, or
I was going to say
gin, port and lemon. Maybe a milk stout or something like that, but generally not beer. So they did have wine. And also another thing was, they didn't serve food in pubs. Well, in country pubs, a lot of them did. It wasn't what we get now. They weren't gastro pubs. It was standard pies and things like that. So yeah, I mean, yes, I agree. It was nothing like it is today, and the availability wasn't like it is today. But it was still there, and you could still get a meal occasionally, or wine, or something more, a more exotic spirit, if the pub had it, if the brewery had said, get rid of this. So I love all the research, as historical authors, all of them probably do, but it's quite a struggle to stop researching and write the damn thing.
Kaz was asking, what's the most interesting thing you've discovered in your research?
That's a difficult one. It's all very interesting. I mean, when I was speaking to Joy Lofthouse, she told me a story that when she was when the women, all of them, not just her, but when all of the women were up, if anything went wrong, if they were ordered to pancake, which is get down on the airstrip fast, because there was raiders coming in, or the aircraft was failing in some way, or the weather had closed in and they had to get down, they always looked out for a USAF base rather than an RAF base. And that's because if they landed at an RAF base, they got tea and biscuits and a bit of a cold shoulder. If they were particularly attractive, they might get a bit more attention, but apart from that, it was still tea and biscuits. On an American air base, they would get tea, well, they would get coffee, and cake and chocolate and nylons and loads of attention and a private tour of the airbase, and really be shown a good time. That's the wrong phrase, but you know what I mean. They were treated well.
Treated well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's because the American air bases had they had the equivalent of a supermarket on the base, whereas we just had bog standard rations. So they would always try and land at a USAF base rather than an RAF base because they got more gifts and more attention. Yeah. So that's something that sticks in my mind from my research. But there's lots of snippets elsewhere. I mean, going on to the last book, Perfect Time to Murder. I'd read a lot about the mines in Kent.
Yeah.
For example, my one's a fictional one, but there was one at I'm not sure how you say it. It's either Bettersanger or Bettershanger. It's near Beaksbourne, between Beaksbourne and Snowdown, which were other. Snowdown was a colliery, but I called mine Beaksbourne because there wasn't one there. And they there was the whole of that east of Kent. It was a coal field, and one of the things I put in the book was a snippet that I found, which I thought was interesting enough to go in, which was in the 1926 general strike. A lot of the miners up north in the big coal fields were blacklisted for leading strikes or taking part, so they couldn't work. They couldn't just go to the next colliery or the next county because they were blacklisted. So they came south where they were less known. The communications with northern collieries was not good, and a lot of them went into Beaksbourne Colliery. So, and in fact, Beaksbourne Colliery I've got it written down here somewhere, 1942, Bettershanger. Bettershanger Colliery in 1942 became the first and only pit to strike during the war. So I thought, that's a good place. If I take a bit of that and put it into my colliery, have them a little bit more militant, that would be interesting. And in fact, that colliery, I believe I'm right in saying that colliery was the last colliery to return to work after the 1984-85 miners' strike.
Right, yeah.
Thatcher's era. Yeah. They were the last colliery to return to work.
Because I had no idea of the sort of southern collieries. I've always sort of associated them with the north and sort of Wales, really. I hadn't really sort of thought that there was anywhere else. No,
well, I kind of, it was in the back of my mind. I kind of saw it, and when I had a bit of a Google, there's a miners' trail, and there's a few buildings above ground. And I just mentioned this to my brother, and he said, "Oh yeah, I live nearby one." He lives in Hersden, nearby, and he's the village that, or part of the, not village, but part of the estate that he lives on was built. It's expanded since those days, but it was built to house the workers for the Chiswick colliery, and that's been built on now. There's not much in the way of anything there. There's a few footings and a few bits of metal sticking out the ground, and I think there's a remain of a platform that used to take the coal trains in and out. But I never knew that was there either.
No.
He did because it was across the road from him.
Yeah,
But he wasn't interested in it until I mentioned it, and he said, "Oh, do you know?" And then I said to him, "Well, let's go and see a real one." There's one in South Wales, but there's one up north. It's the National Coal Mining Museum in Wakefield, near Wakefield. Yeah. I thought, I'll go there. And so we did a bit of a road trip. We went to the Emergency Services Museum and the Space Museum and other bits and pieces. But the first thing, we spent a couple of days up at the Hope Colliery, I think it's called. But it's one of two collieries, the Hope Hope and Capstone are two pit heads in the National Mining Museum. So we had a look around, took a load of pictures, and that gave me lots of information to set the scene for book 3. Things like the winding engineman and the sounds and the instruction to get the pit things up and down. And we went down on a tour. So we went down, weren't allowed to take phones or anything electrical because there's still gases and things down there. And I thought, yes, okay, good. This is up my street.
Yeah.
And there was a guy called Glenn Bryan. He was our guide. His nickname back in his mining day was Big Bird. Quite a large chap, as you can imagine. So named after the Sesame Street.
Sesame Street's Big Bird, yeah.
And he's very knowledgeable. Clearly had a love of mining. I suppose to many it was just a place to work and not very nice environment. But I said to him, "Do you miss it?" And he said, "Yeah, I miss it." He said the next best thing is taking people down to see where I used to work and enthusing over it and give them a sense of how I felt when I was working down there. Oh, great, good. Anyway, so we went down and he showed us the historic bit and then the more modern bit and a little bit of more tunnels and things, some of the mining equipment. And my brother and I were part of a slightly large group. I think it was about 8 or 9 of us down there. But every now and again, I would say things like, how long would it take gases to build up if the fan stopped circulating the air? And he'd give me a side eye and give me an answer. And a bit later on, I'd say, how much carbon monoxide would build up in this chamber? And I asked so many questions like that the other people in the group, I think, started to get a little bit worried about what I was intending to
do. Yeah.
And when we came out and we were saying goodbye, I had to explain to him that I was trying to write a book set in a colliery, and his information had been invaluable. And he said, "Oh, I understand now." I said, "I was getting a bit worried about what you were trying to do." So that was an interesting part of the research. And I do like to go to places to see for myself. I mean, you can get things from books. You can do Google Earth, Street View and things like that. But if you're there, you can hear things, you can smell things, you can get a sense of the claustrophobic nature or the expanse, whatever it is, of where you are. So although it's possible to do it all from your desk, I'm one of these authors who like to get out and about and see stuff.
And also, I think if you can see it, it's much easier for you to be able to sort of portray that on paper, so that the reader can visualize it, isn't it? Because I think you really do. I think your books really do sort of take you to that, to the airfield or to the colliery, or So I think that is important. I mean, obviously, they say some people can do it without doing all the research, but actually, if you enjoy the research as well, that sort of adds to the pleasure of the writing, I imagine.
It does, yeah. Although it's a distraction as well.
Yeah. Rabbit holes are a dangerous thing, aren't they? How do you, when you sort of have an idea, when you sort of came up with a series, did you always know it was going to be a series from the outset? Did you know that you had enough material for the 3 books?
I pitched it. I pitched it as a series. I had a very, very detailed. Well, I'd written the first book, but also the second one was several pages long in detail, and I had a detailed synopsis of number 3. And I did have outlines and titles for more, if that was to come to fruition. So when I pitched it, what actually happened was I was in a Curtis Brown Creative School. Now I know that not everyone. They say not everyone needs a writing course, but I felt that I was at the stage where I needed to know whether I was any good, and I needed somebody knowledgeable to tell me that without sending out to agents all the time and having nothing back. So I went on this course, and there was about 15 of us. 8 have now got book deals, including somebody that people may know about is Bonnie Garmus, who wrote Lessons in Chemistry. It's gone stratospheric.
Oh yes, yes.
She sold millions of books. Got a series on television. She's our star performer. We're all hanging on to her coattails, really. So I didn't get an agent through that. I got lots of information and lots of good stuff and developed my story. But they said, why don't you go and it's the Blue Pencil Agency First Novel Award. Try that. So I did, and I came third, and that's where I met my agent. She then said, well, I want to see the whole thing. So I had the whole thing, and I had all the other bits and pieces to go with it. So she then pitched it to publishers as a series, and I got 3-book series, and I was very grateful for that because it's a lifelong dream to have books on shelves, and rather than just one sitting there and being on its own, I can point to a cluster, if you like.
Yes. Yeah, no, that must be. So has the series ended now, or would you like to carry it on?
I think it has ended, although you can never say never. I mean, there may be an opportunity in the future to write more, but I don't know. At the moment, this one is as it this 3. That's what it is.
Yeah.
But if somebody says to me, "Oh, can you write 2 or 3 more?" I shall open my drawers and there'll be all the research, and it's here. It's at my fingertips if they need it.
Yeah.
Something that you were saying earlier on about developing a book, plotting and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Supposedly you're either a plotter or a pantser. I don't understand how pantsers can work. I mean, writing a book by the seat of your pants, not knowing where you're going or what the story is, you discover the story en route. Your story, for me, the story might change en route. The reason for writing it, or the goal or the message at the end might be different, but you have to have something to set off towards. So what I've got is I've got the start point, and I know how I want to finish it. And then I've got some nice little set pieces I think might fit in along the way. And so what I do is I then set off from A to B, and it'll get there. And then the next one is C. But okay, no, actually it's going off here a little bit. So I'll go. So I will have these waypoints that I want to hit, but in between they can do a little bit of weaving.
Yeah.
If it turns out, as it did annoyingly with both book 1 and 2, that 3/4 of the way through writing it, I realised the murderer I've chosen isn't the murderer. And it's kind of kind of moment, but it's also damn, because you've then got to go back and see whether you've seeded enough for the new person to be the murderer without implicating the other person too much, but not taking too much away, because you want that person now to be a red herring. A false suspect kind of.
Yeah.
So it's I couldn't do that if I was a pantser. My goodness, that would I would end up in care somewhere. I just couldn't do it. Well, I suppose it's because I'm an ex-civil servant. I like order, and I used to write ministerial submissions where you had to have boom, 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 boom with bits of information.
Yeah.
And you had subheadings and all this kind of thing. So my book is kind of subheadings that I have to write, and then I take the subheadings out. And the way that I keep track of things, because as you can probably tell by the way I speak, my brain goes all over the shop. And so when I'm thinking about stuff, it's kind of firing off in different directions. So to keep track of people, I call it a chart, but Louise Mumford annoyingly called it a spreadsheet, and she wouldn't let me go until I admitted it was a spreadsheet. She said, she said, well, you do realise it's a spreadsheet because you've got this and this and this. Okay. I always thought a spreadsheet was numbers and stuff, but she said, no, it can be this. And what I've got is the timeline down the left-hand side, which I can break down into days or particular hours, specific times if I need be. And across the top, I've got characters and various bits of scenery, various locations. So I know who's where, who's done what, who knows what, what bits have still got to be revealed to who. And crucially for me, particularly in the Kember and Hayes books, is do Kember and Hayes have equal screen time? So they have their own colours. So I can visually look at it and go, there's too much green. So I need to up the blue for Lizzie or whatever. So it's both a visual thing and an anti-pantser device.
It does sound quite spreadsheet like, I must admit. Do you because I was thinking about so you've got the 3 books as well, is I guess that sort of, for whatever you want to call it, spreadsheet or whatever, you have to sort of keep an element of that when you're writing the 3 books, because you've obviously got to go back and to be able to have that continuity between the series, so that that you remember what Lizzie did in book 1 or Kember said in book 2 to book 3.
If there are particular phrases or incidents that I like and think that's going to be referred back to at some stage, then I'll jot them down on a separate sheet or a separate file. But as I've got a biography file, so each page is a different character. So the lead characters are always at the top. Well, actually, I do it in alphabetical now because it got complicated. It's also a way of trying to keep the number of characters down. So if you go over a certain number, you think, nobody's going to remember them all. If I can't, they won't. So I've got and I've got the same kind of standard things like name, position, height, weight, eye colour, all that kind of thing, so that I don't do. I've heard other authors say, "Oh my God, in book 3, I changed their blue eyes to the brown." Well, hopefully I won't do that because I've got it all written down what they look like, and then I've got a bit of history about their original backstory, and then as I write things in the story, I'll add that. If it's a particular piece that's going to be remembered, I'll put that in as well, and attributes. If I say Kember is a crack shot, that goes in there as a crack shot. If I say that Lizzie's never held a pistol before, then I'll put that in. If he's particularly partial to jam and cream scones, I'll put that in because food. I like putting little snippets of food in as well. So I've got the biographies to keep it place to keep that in a place. I've got the spreadsheets that I can look back on to see where the timeline and how that worked and who they met. And then it's just a case of if I want to put something in that is particularly pertinent, I can put it in, even if it's not in book 1 or 2, because you can't say everything in book 1 or 2. So if you say it in book 3, it doesn't matter, it's not been said. You're now saying that once upon a time it was said. So as long as you don't go too off-piste, that's fine.
So this series is finished. So what's next for you, Neil?
Well, interestingly, more historical research. I was commissioned by Leodora Darlington of Orion Fiction to write two cozy crime stories. Historic royal palaces and Orion had begun a collaboration for someone to write stories set in Hampton Court Palace and the Tower of London. Two stories. They didn't want it modern, they didn't want it in the wartime, so I suggested 1891 or 1890s. And 1891 was a good year because there's a specific incident that takes place that's only a minor thing, but it anchors it in history, in reality as well. They want certain specific things they wanted me to do. They wanted it set in the Grace and Favour apartments, which I'd heard of Grace and Favour, but I hadn't realised that there was about more than that, dozens of apartments in Hampton Court. All these rooms that had been for entourages in medieval times were now given because various wives' husbands had died either in service or afterwards. And so the wives got given these at the grace and favour of Queen Victoria, usually. Although she opened the palace as well. And a lot of the residents started to be really annoyed that all these interlopers were coming in and gawping through their windows. But yeah, there were so many of these places in there. And I thought, wow, yeah, okay. I can write a cozy crime in there. They want me to use the housekeeper, not the real one, but make one up.
Yeah.
And have her as the sleuth. So hence Mrs. Lydia Bramble was born. And she's got a friend and sidekick called the Reverend Weaver, who's the chaplain of the Chapel Royal in Hampton Court. And when a murder takes place on their patch, and the incoming Scotland Yard detective is not to her liking, she investigates, he would say, on his behalf. But yeah, she kind of gets in his way, and she sends him off on various errands and wild goose chases to get him out of the way while she does the real investigating. And so it's how she solves the murder in there. And so I had a private tour at the grace and favour of the Hampton Court Historic Royal Palaces. They took me around all these little nooks and crannies, and it's amazing how there's 1,400 rooms or something there. It's amazing. You know, all the passageways leading from A to B, and courtyards, and there's dozens of courtyards that you don't know, little courtyards, as well as the big three main ones that you go in there. And there's a couple of side ones, and the big Baroque fountains court at the end had grace and favour on the top floor as well, and the ladies couldn't, and the staff couldn't carry their baskets up that way, so they've got a pulley system, and they wound the pulley to wind their basket up full of their goods.
Oh, wow.
One of those is still there, and I've got photographs of it. So again, going off onto tangents into history and what have you.
Yeah.
But in this book, Murder at the Palace, I think it's being called at the moment, that is going to be out next Easter. I'm excited about that, and I've given back the line edits this morning, actually, so that's well in hand. And also already into research at the Tower of London. A couple of weeks ago, or a few weeks ago now, before I had COVID, they took me around the palace. So I had the synopsis, and I gave them a list of places I wanted to see, and they said, well, you can't see that. You can't see that because that's a private residence. You can't see that because it's full of soldiers, and you can't see this. So I came up with a list of alternatives that I wanted to see, which was close enough for me to get a peek in through windows and things. So I didn't get to see inside various places, but I got close enough to get a flavour.
Yeah.
Plus a little bit of Googling online, watching a Channel 5 programme, I think it is, about the Tower of London. It's a periodic series, and various other bits and pieces. And also, I must say that Claire Murphy, I think it's Claire Murphy of Historic Royal Palaces, has been a trooper really in pumping stuff my way. I don't know if I've got it to hand at the moment. I had, oops. Yes, giving me loads of booklets like this one, Grace and Favour.
Oh, fascinating. Oh, so you've got a lot of rabbit holes to go down with this one then.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of stuff in. There's loads of stuff in there, and what was particularly interesting to me was I found a document, which I'm going to show you now, part of it, which has got it's a plan. This is the first floor of Hampton Court Palace with all the apartments marked, and in that same document, it tells you who lived in which apartment at which time. So I know exactly who lived there during my period. How many apartments there were. Some of them were on 2 or 3 floors, and they went up spiral staircases. It's marvellous. I mean, to somebody writing historical fiction, it was marvellous. And one story I got to quickly tell you about was that I had a couple of hours there, and obviously I couldn't take up their time too much. And I said thank you and goodbye. And I thought, I'm going to have to go back. I was going to go back as a punter and just stand. Whereas I was whizzed round, I'm going to have to stand there and just look at stuff and
Yeah.
again smell and hear and what have you. A friend of mine that I've known since school, Peter, he said, "I'll come with you." So we went along, and he took pictures as a tourist, and so did I. And then I said, "Well, I need to know how you can get from here to there, how quickly, what route you might take." He said, "Okay, follow me." And he's an old amateur dramatics person. He's acted on stage and he's directed. So he kind of went in. He kind of went into detective hunter mode, going out looking for this criminal, and he was looking into nooks and crannies and in archways and going through colonnades and cloisters to the place where this thing would finish, with me filming him on an iPhone. And that was quite amusing because out the corner of my eye, I could see all these strange looks we were getting as he was kind of going like that, and I was this guy filming behind him. So that was good fun.
It does sound like you have fun doing your research, actually. I think that's probably why it comes across so well in your books, because you obviously really enjoy it and get a lot out of it. So I think that sort of comes across. If it was sort of like a mundane experience, I think that would come over. But yeah, that's why I think it's so rich and full of sort of life. And that must be exciting writing about. I mean, that's really different from the wartime. I know it's historical still, and you're still in that. But the sort of cozy crime is a completely different sort of genre than your books.
Well, I thought so as well. I thought mine, if anything, I thought mine was the darker end of cozy crime. It was a bit. I had to tone them down a bit because I was told that certain sensibilities wouldn't like some of the things that I was putting in. They said the time to do that is kind of past. But I thought, well, I've read books still that have blood and gore in them. But they wanted me to have a certain feel to them, so I did that. But they still counted them as cozy crime because it's a wartime environment, a closed village or closed pit, colliery.
Yeah.
A finite number of characters who could be the murderer or be suspects. So they called it cozy from that aspect. But this one is cozy insofar as it's the period it's set in is more cozy, if you like, more traditionally cozy, and it's not the golden age, but it's still kind of that style. I think Mrs. Bramble is more cozy crime sleuth than Lizzie Hayes or Kember is. Certainly with her relationship with the Reverend Weaver, which is I hope it's humorous. He helps her a lot, but just and and the environment again is a closed environment. It's somebody in the palace has done this, and although there are a lot of people living there, it takes place in one part of the palace, and although the murderer could come from anywhere, they probably come from over here. That's what people are thinking, and so that brings that theatre down to that, and then is that the correct, or should they be focusing up there? Well, you find out on the route on the way. So these two, and obviously the Tower of London again. The murder takes place in the Tower of London. They lock that down and say, right, nobody in, nobody out until we solve this. It can only be somebody in here, and it's probably not going to be the soldiers, is it? It's not going to be the yeoman warders. It's not going to be the chaplain. Or is it? I mean, somebody has got to have done this. It's got to be one of them. But they're all innocent, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, that's the exciting thing, isn't it, with crime, is you never know. You never know who it is. And it's nice to know, plot along as you go. I'm just looking at the time and we're coming up to the hour. So just before we go, have you read anything recently that you'd like to recommend to people watching?
I'm reading one at the moment, actually. I've met Vaseem Khan a few times and chatted to him a lot, and he's a really good bloke and he's helped me. And I know that he's got several books out, and I've read a few of them. But the one I'm reading at the moment is Midnight at Malabar House, which I'm really enjoying. It's about what's her name, Inspector Persis Wadia. She's the first female police officer in India. So to a large degree, she's getting what Lizzie Hayes gets. She's getting all the cold shoulder and the misogyny, and you shouldn't be in the police force, should you? So I'm finding a lot of parallels in that kind of relationship she has with people. And she's heading up her team as well, which is unheard of. Not only is she the first police officer, but she's got a team as well. So that's I like that, because it's, when I read, I don't really get on with reading, apart from Lee Child stuff, I suppose. I don't really get on with reading American crime fiction, but I do like it when people like Fazim Khan or Abia Mukherjee takes it to India or somewhere completely different.
Yeah,
the number one ladies detective agency in Botswana. They all those kind. When it's somewhere else,
then it sort of gets
not America, but different to here. That kind of piques my interest. Yeah, I don't think I could attempt something like that myself out of the UK, but I like reading other people's work in doing that. So yeah, Midnight at Malabar House. I like that one.
Oh, that's good. Great. Fantastic recommendation. Thank you, Neil. It's been fascinating talking to you about your series, and I'm really looking forward to finding out about the new ones. So please come and back on again in April and tell us about the cozy crimes, because they sound fascinating. I love the sound of those. I think the vicar and what is she called, Mrs. Bramble?
Mrs. Bramble, yeah.
Yeah, I like the sound of her.
a deliberately chosen name. She winds around everything, and she's a bit spiky at times, but yeah.
Yeah, I do like the sound of her. I think she's going to be fun. Thank you for everybody for watching. Thank you, Neil, for joining us. Neil's book, A Perfect Time to Murder, is out now, along with the other two, which I can see behind his head. So we've got A Quiet Place to Kill and a Silent Way to Die. I'm reading this backwards on your screen.
Oh, is it? Oh, right. Sorry.
Yeah. I'm trying to do my mirror image. So thank you, Neil. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And we'll see you all again soon.
Thanks, you for having
Neil.
me.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.